The letter said my children belonged to my dead husband, biologically. I read that sentence 3 times at the front desk of my bookkeeping office while a delivery driver waited for my signature. 10 months had passed since Adrian died, and documents still arrived with his name on them, insurance corrections, tax notices, statements from accounts I thought I had closed. I assumed this was another loose end, then I saw Rachel's name, below hers was Luke's. The envelope came from Commonwealth Heritage Bank. It concerned a dormant descendant trust worth about $3.1 million. The bank was reviewing the beneficiaries after Adrian's death and needed current information for his verified biological descendants. Rachel was 30. Luke was 26. I had adopted them 4 years apart through 2 separate private placements. Adrian was listed as their natural father. The driver asked whether I was all right. I blamed an empty stomach, signed his screen, and locked the office door. I made my living finding mistakes other people missed. Numbers left tracks, so I treated the letter like an error. I checked the account number, return address, signature block, and contact information. Then I searched Adrian's estate file. There was no mention of a trust. I called the bank using the number on its official website. A woman in fiduciary services confirmed the letter was genuine. I'm his surviving spouse. I said. Both children were adopted. Your records are wrong. There was a pause while she typed. I understand, Mrs. Ellison. I can request the trust instrument and beneficiary certification. What certification? I'm not authorized to discuss the supporting records until your acknowledgement is processed. Then send me the documents. She said it could take several business days. I documented the call. When the call ended, I placed the letter on my desk between 2 folders. One was labeled Clients, the other was labeled Family. I no longer knew where the truth belonged. Rachel called before noon. She was a pediatric nurse and checked on me between rounds. Did you confirm the furnace appointment? She asked. Yesterday. And you're not going to follow the technician around? The last one was guessing. Mom, let somebody else be competent for 10 minutes. That was Rachel's way of loving me. She accepted my help until it became control, then pushed back before I could take over. I almost told her. Instead, I asked whether she had eaten. She groaned. That is exactly what I mean. After we hung up, I hated how relieved I felt. The secret was barely an hour old, and I was already protecting it. Luke came by near closing with a replacement hinge for a filing cabinet. I had mentioned the loose door once. He remembered things people said in passing. He arrived from the distribution warehouse with dust on his boots. He set the hinge on my desk, then noticed Adrian's photograph lying face down. You cleaning, or are you mad at a dead guy? The glass was catching the light. There's no window on that side. I turned the photograph upright. Luke smiled but kept watching me. Rachel asked questions directly. Luke waited for people to reveal themselves. You want help with dinner? I already made something. Of course. I made enough for you. Also of course. He took a container from the office refrigerator. He knew which shelf was his, yet sometimes moved through my spaces as though permission could expire. Adrian and I never hid that Luke was adopted. We simply handled the subject carefully and rarely. Adrian always said there would be time for deeper questions when Luke was older. Luke got older. Adrian kept changing the subject. Now a bank letter claimed he had been Luke's biological father all along. You sure you're okay? Luke asked. I'm behind on work. You're never behind. I am today. He did not believe me. At the door, he said, you can call me without inventing a repair. After he left, I remembered how both adoptions began. Adrian brought me Rachel's placement packet already knowing the agency, the caseworker, and the deadlines. He called it extraordinary luck. 4 years later, when we were told about Luke, Adrian again knew exactly whom to contact and how quickly we had to act. I had admired his certainty. Now it looked rehearsed. At 6:14 that evening, an email arrived from Vale Family Pathways, the nonprofit that had handled both placements. The message referred to a historic records reconciliation. Attached was a confidentiality agreement and an authorization allowing the foundation to collect, amend, transfer, and restrict access to placement records connected to my family. The language was broad enough to erase whatever it claimed to correct. They wanted my signature within 48 hours. 8 minutes later, my phone rang from a Pittsburgh number. I let it go to voicemail. A woman introduced herself as Judith Vale. Mara, I know paperwork like this can feel alarming. There is no emergency, and no one is questioning your family. We need your cooperation to correct some older administrative inconsistencies. Please call me before contacting outside parties. It will be easier on everyone if we handle this privately. She called again the next morning, then once more after lunch. Each message was calm. None explained why her foundation knew about the bank review before I had told anyone. I printed the email, the agreement, and the message headers. I copied every page of the bank letter. The copies went into my office safe. I carried the originals to my safe deposit box. I did not sign Judith's agreement. I did not return her calls. Instead, I sent the bank a written request for the complete trust instrument. Amendments, and every record used to identify Rachel and Luke as beneficiaries. For 2 days, nothing happened. Rachel texted to remind me about Sunday dinner, then added, "Do not cook 3 separate meals. We are adults." Luke sent a picture of the repaired cabinet with the message, "Proof I am useful without supervision." I looked at their names on my phone and wondered what would happen when those same names appeared on documents they had never seen. On the 3rd morning, an encrypted message arrived from the bank. The full file was still under review, but the representative had been authorized to release the first page of the original trust. I downloaded it and read the opening paragraph beside the copier. Adrian Paul Ellison was identified as settler and natural father of the named descendants. That was the line I expected. The next line emptied the room of air. Judith Vale was not listed only as trustee or foundation representative. She was identified as Rachel and Luke's natural mother. Judith Vale's name stayed on my screen after I closed the trust document. By noon, I had read every public page I could find. Vale Family Pathways had grown into a polished non-profit with donors, state contracts, and smiling adoptive families. Judith's biography praised ethical adoption. Adrian was never mentioned. I called and said I needed help correcting an estate record. I did not mention that the trust identified her as Rachel and Luke's biological mother. She invited me to Pittsburgh the next morning. The foundation occupied a renovated brick building near the river. Its lobby displayed children's drawings and family portraits. I recognized the walnut conference table. It had once stood in Adrian's office. He later claimed he donated it. Now it sat beneath Judith's donor wall. She came through a glass door with both hands extended. Silver threaded through her dark hair. "Mara. I wish we were meeting under easier circumstances." On her shelf sat a brass clock I had given Adrian for our 15th anniversary. "I received a trust document," I said. "It does not match my children's adoption records." Judith folded her hands. Old files can sound more definite than the circumstances behind them. The trust calls Adrian their natural father. It calls you their natural mother. Her expression changed, but not from surprise. "I knew Adrian before you married him." "Were you involved with him?" "Professionally." "That was not my question." Judith studied me. "Mara, I am trying to prevent a complicated record from injuring 2 adults who had no part in creating it." "What is the trust?" "Adrian created it to support 2 young people whose futures mattered to him." "They are my children." "Of course they are." "Then why is your name beside the word mother?" She said old confidentiality practices sometimes used names to shield other names. It was polished and impossible to disprove on the spot. Then she said, "Luke has always been more vulnerable to questions about belonging." My grip tightened around my purse. "What do you know about Luke's questions?" "Post-placement reports often include adjustment concerns." "Do they mention the scar above his knee?" "He was an active child. He fell through a fishing dock when he was 11. That was not in a placement report." Judith opened a folder. The record notes a childhood injury. "He weighed 7 pounds, 3 ounces at birth, according to the intake sheet." I had seen Luke's intake sheet. His birth weight was blank, Then Judith said, Rachel still asks for lemon cake on her birthday, doesn't she? Rachel's lemon cake began when she turned 6 and rejected the cake I ordered. Adrian drove across town for another. How would you know that? Adrian spoke about the children. How often? He was proud of them. How often, Judith? Her face softened. That is not the question that will protect them now. She moved from behind the desk and sat across from me. If this becomes public, Rachel may be questioned at work about a sealed placement. Luke may receive information before he is prepared. Adrian's memory will be reduced to one decision. Parts of it were reasonable. That made her dangerous. Rachel worked with sick children and trusted families. Luke pretended he did not care where he came from. At 19, he asked whether his birth father also liked repairing things. Adrian changed the subject. Judith watched me absorb every risk. You can keep this contained, she said. Not hidden. Contained. She placed a settlement packet on the table. Vale Family Pathways would pay me $275,000. The trust would remain available for Rachel and Luke. In exchange, I had to sign the confidentiality agreement, withdraw my request for the original placement files, and allow the foundation to control future disclosures. And if I refuse? No one is threatening you. You sent the agreement before I knew what it covered. We acted quickly because fragmented information causes harm. You mean information you do not control? Her smile disappeared. I mean information your children may not survive in the way you imagine. I left the packet on her table. I need time. Take it. But do not request sealed files independently. Outside, I sat in my car without starting it. Through the lobby windows, I could see Adrian's walnut table. Judith had admitted nothing, but she knew too much. I called Miles Grant from the parking garage. He had handled probate disputes for several of my clients and had a reputation for disappointing people honestly. By 4 o'clock, he was reading every document. You did not sign anything? No, you did not try to access sealed files using your children's information? No, good. Keep saying no to anything clever. He explained that the trust page raised serious questions but proved less than I wanted. Judith's knowledge was alarming but weak in court without a lawful source, so what can you do? Request documents you have standing to request. Preserve every communication. Build a timeline. And keep you from destroying your own case. He warned that sealed files might require a court order. If I obtained them improperly, Judith could make my conduct the center of the dispute. I know how to investigate accounts. You know how to reconcile accounts. This is different. I hired him. That evening, I spread old adoption expenses across my dining table, fees, travel receipts, retainers, and checks Adrian said were urgent. Rachel arrived without knocking. Are those our adoption files? Expense records. Why are you reviewing them? I'm cleaning up the estate. Did Dad leave debts? The truthful answer was that I did not know what Adrian had left. Money. Children. Lies. No. Nothing you need to worry about. Rachel watched me. You only say that when there is something to worry about. I will tell you if it affects you. They are my adoption records. How would they not affect me? I gathered the papers too quickly. It is routine accounting. The lie was smaller than Adrian's, but I felt its shape immediately. I was using uncertainty to control what Rachel knew. She left without taking the food I had packed for her. After midnight, I compared every payment date against old bank statements. 3 adoption-related checks had cleared through an inheritance account funded by my grandmother. Adrian managed the transfers. One withdrawal matched the week Luke entered our home, another went to a law firm missing from his packet, the third went directly to Vale Family Pathways. My phone lit up with a notification from the Foundation's alumni network. Luke had been invited to join a private group for adults connected to historic placements. Judith was reaching toward him while telling me she wanted to protect him. The next morning, Miles called. I received the administrative indexes. Not the sealed files. Just enough to compare the entries. And Rachel and Luke were recorded as unrelated placements from different birth families. That is what we were told. Yes. But both files were approved by the same case officer. That could happen. It could. He paused. The officer used the same emergency exception in both cases. Same wording. Same authorization sequence. 4 years apart. I looked at the withdrawal from my grandmother's account, then at Luke's invitation from Judith's foundation, 2 children. 2 supposedly unrelated families. 1 case officer. 1 identical exception. Miles lowered his voice. Mara, this does not look like coincidence. It didn't. Miles traced the case officer's name through an old licensing directory. Elena Park had retired 8 years earlier and moved to a small town south of Pittsburgh. He called first. She hung up before he finished introducing himself. The next day, I drove there with copies of the administrative indexes. Miles made me promise not to accuse her, threaten her, or offer her anything. You are not going there to win, he said. You are going to learn what frightens her. Elena lived in a narrow brick duplex. She opened the door only after I held my license against the glass. I told the attorney I have nothing to discuss. You approved my children's placements. I approved hundreds. Not with the same emergency exception 4 years apart. The door began closing. I said Adrian's name, then Judith's. Elena looked toward the street. You need to leave. My husband is listed as the biological father of 2 children we adopted from supposedly unrelated families. For 1 second, her face showed recognition. I have a pension, she said quietly. I have a granddaughter in college. If you drag me into this, they will say I acted alone. Who will? She locked the door. Miles was not surprised. Fear is information, he said. It is not testimony. For the next week, I handled client accounts during the day and rebuilt my family's history at night. Rachel began calling every evening. You sound exhausted. I am catching up on work. You told Luke you were not behind. I had forgotten they spoke. Mom, are you sick? No. Then tell me what is happening. I cannot yet. She came by the next morning and found my dining table empty. I had moved the adoption records to the office. You are starting to sound like Dad, she said. She left without taking the food I had packed for her. Luke stopped visiting. He answered my messages with 1 or 2 words. When I asked if he wanted dinner, he wrote, no need to manage me. Miles found public reports from a foster care assistance fund. Elena's name was absent, but 1 note caught my attention. Anonymous former placement employee, 12 quarterly gifts. The amounts were uneven, $850, $1,100, $675. They looked less like charity than installments against a private debt. I remembered seeing an envelope from that fund inside Elena's mailbox. I drove back and left a copy of the report under her door with 1 sentence across the margin. I know you have been paying something back. She called Miles that night. The second meeting took place in his office. A digital recorder sat between us beside an agreement stating that cooperation did not guarantee immunity. Elena read it twice. I was paid, she said. Not enough to ruin my life for. Enough to make it impossible to call myself innocent. A law firm connected to Vail Family Pathways donors had sent her consulting payments while her husband underwent cancer treatment. After he died, she began sending part of her pension to the foster care fund anonymously. That does not undo it, she said. Miles asked her to start with Rachel. Judith came to us late in the pregnancy. She said the father was married and public identification would destroy several lives. She was building the foundation, and a politically connected donor had made it clear that scandal would end his support. Was Adrian the father? I saw sworn declarations signed by both of them. And me? I asked. Adrian said his wife had been trying to adopt. Trying, the word reduced years of appointments, denials, treatments, and private grief to a weakness someone else had studied. He said you were stable and had resources. He said you wanted a child badly enough to accept an emergency placement before demanding a complete history. I remembered Adrian arriving with Rachel's packet pressed against his chest. He said a baby needed a home immediately. I signed where he pointed. 4 years later, he used the same urgency with Luke. Why was there a second child? Judith and Adrian remained in contact. When she became pregnant again, they reused the arrangement because it had worked. My marriage had been their system. My longing had been their protection. Elena opened a worn accordion folder. She had kept copies because she feared Judith would destroy the originals. She placed 2 hospital photographs side by side. Rachel was wrapped in a pale green blanket with a yellow stitched edge. Luke, 4 years later, was wrapped in the same blanket. A brown stain marked the same corner in both photographs. Some records were amended, Elena said. Others were sealed under substitute identifiers. The emergency exception allowed placement before all disclosures were completed. She handed me ledger copies. My handwriting appeared on the first check. Adrian told me it covered placement counsel and temporary medical care. The ledger showed that my money paid Vale Family Pathways, a private apartment where Judith stayed after Rachel's birth, legal retainers, and a hospital invoice in Judith's name. The funds came from the inheritance my grandmother left me. I had financed the concealment that made me a mother. Why did Adrian choose me? Elena took a long breath. He said you would open your home before asking who had created the emergency. That was when I stopped thinking of Adrian's betrayal as an affair. An affair would have meant he desired someone else. This was planning. He knew I had been abandoned by my own mother. He knew I equated being useful with being kept. He watched me struggle to build a family and turn that struggle into a solution for himself and Judith. I left the room until my hands stopped shaking. When I returned, Elena continued for 3 hours. Miles separated what she had witnessed from what she had been told. She admitted accepting money and bypassing safeguards. I was pressured, she said. I was also paid. Both are true. Over the next several days, Miles obtained certified bank records supporting her account. He filed a narrow probate petition asking that no trustee, beneficiary designation, or distribution be changed until the parentage claims and trust authority were reviewed. The judge did not award us the trust. The judge froze it. Judith's lawyers responded within 48 hours. They accused me of exploiting confidential adoption material to interfere with money intended for Rachel and Luke. They suggested grief and financial interest had made me incapable of respecting my children's independent rights. They also threatened to seek my removal as representative of Adrian's estate. Judith left one voicemail: Mara, there is still time to keep the children from becoming exhibits in your dispute with a dead man. I forwarded it to Miles. Rachel began stopping by my office before her shifts. Luke did not. When I finally reached him, he sounded tired. Did I do something? No. Then why do you look at me like you are trying to remember whether you chose correctly? I have never regretted you. That is not what I asked. I told him I was dealing with something connected to Adrian's estate, connected to me. I could have answered. Instead, I asked for more time. All my life, you and Dad said there would be time later. He ended the call. That evening, Miles sent me Elena's signed statement and the certified payment exhibits. The facts were no longer suspicions. They were organized, witnessed, and filed. Judith knew the trust was frozen. Her lawyers were moving against me. She had already found a path toward Luke through the alumni network. Waiting no longer protected Rachel and Luke, it protected Judith. I called both children and asked them to meet me at the house. Rachel said she would come after her shift. Luke did not answer, so I left a message telling him it concerned Adrian and their adoptions, and that I would not lie to him again. I arrived home carrying Elena's statement, the payment records, and the 2 hospital photographs. Luke's truck was already in the driveway. He was sitting at the kitchen table when I entered. Judith Vale's business card lay in front of him. He tapped the card and looked up at me. Why did she know my father's private nickname for me? The nickname was Sparrow. Adrian started using it when Luke was 7 because he could never sit still at breakfast. He would steal half a piece of toast, run outside, come back for his backpack, then leave again because he had forgotten his shoes. Adrian never used it around anyone outside our house. I set the folders on the kitchen table. How did you meet Judith? She contacted me through the foundation group. When? 3 days ago. My fear came out sounding like anger, and you went to see her without telling me? Luke pushed back his chair. You have been investigating my adoption for weeks without telling me. I was trying to verify the facts before I handed you something that could destroy your idea of your father. My idea? He pointed toward the folders. You already decided which truth I could handle. Now you are mad because somebody else spoke before you gave permission. Rachel arrived while we were still standing across from each other. She wore navy scrubs beneath her coat and looked from Luke to the business card. What happened? Luke answered before I could. Mom has been keeping secrets about our adoptions. Rachel's eyes moved to me. I asked you directly. I know. Was Dad involved? I pulled out 2 chairs, neither of them Saturday, so I told them the part one believed they needed first. Adrian was listed as their biological father. Their supposedly unrelated placements had been approved by the same caseworker through matching emergency exceptions. The trust named them as his descendants. A former employee had confirmed that he arranged both adoptions. I did not identify Judith as their biological mother. I did not explain that my inheritance had financed the placements. I told myself I was creating space for them to absorb the first blow. Luke saw the gaps. Who is our mother? I am still confirming details. That means you know something. I know allegations. Judith told me she knew Adrian before you married him. Rachel gripped the back of a chair. Dad had 2 children with someone else and brought them home for Mom to raise. The words made the arrangement sound as cruel as it was. I nodded. Rachel covered her mouth. Then she crossed the kitchen and put both arms around me. I'm sorry. Luke stared at us. Rachel looked over her shoulder. What? You heard the same thing I did, and your first concern is Mom. Because Dad used her. He used us too. I did not say he didn't. Luke turned to me. How long have you known? About 3 weeks. His face hardened. 3 weeks. I needed evidence. You needed control. Rachel told him to slow down. He laughed once, without humor. Of course you agree with her. You always knew exactly where you belonged. That is not fair. No, Rachel. Fair would have been learning my father's name before a probate filing turned me into a beneficiary. For years, Luke had pretended his missing history did not matter. I had mistaken silence for peace. Now I saw relief beneath his anger. Adrian had not been an unknown man in an unavailable record. He had been there for every birthday, every broken appliance, every ordinary morning. The truth wounded Luke, but it also filled a space he had carried his whole life. I am glad you have an answer about Adrian, I said. Then why do you look terrified that I might want the rest? Because the rest included Judith, because Judith had studied him before approaching him, because she had already shown that she could turn concern into leverage. I need you to stay away from her until Miles reviews everything. Luke's jaw tightened. That is not your decision. She manipulated your placement. You have not even told me what she supposedly did. I am telling you she is dangerous. No. You are giving me instructions. Rachel stepped between us. Luke, we should verify what Judith says. I am going to verify it. With her. He picked up the business card. Do not call her again. The command left my mouth before I could soften it. Luke stared at me. There it is. He walked out. Rachel stayed behind. She sat at the table and read the trust page twice. Is Judith our biological mother? I should have answered. Instead, I said, Miles has not confirmed every element. Rachel looked at me for a long time. You are still doing it. Doing what? Deciding which truth belongs to us. She left the hospital photographs face down and went after her brother. Judith met Luke privately the next afternoon. I learned the details later, in pieces. She told him she had been young, frightened, and dependent on donors who could destroy the foundation before it began. She said Adrian convinced her that Mara Ellison could give the children a stable life without forcing Judith into public exposure. She did not deny the deception. She presented it as sacrifice. She showed Luke medical histories, photographs from the hospital, and letters Adrian had written about the children. One photograph showed Luke at 8 years old, holding a red fishing pole beside Adrian. I had taken almost the same photograph that day. Mine was framed in our hallway. Judith's had been taken from farther back, through the open door of the bait shop. She had been watching. She also gave Luke Adrian's watch. The silver one I believed had disappeared at the hospital after he died. Judith said Adrian wanted Luke to have it. A Foundation photographer captured the moment she fastened it around his wrist. By evening, the photograph appeared in a private donor newsletter beneath a line about reconnecting adults with their hidden histories. Luke insisted he had not approved publicity. Judith apologized and blamed a communications employee. Then she offered him a future advisory position at the foundation. Not money, she said. A voice: Luke wanted records, not a job. Judith placed a tablet in front of him and said he needed to sign a release before she could open sealed material. He read the visible page. It authorized access to personal placement and medical files. He signed. When he came home, Adrian's watch was on his wrist. I saw it before he took off his coat. Where did you get that? Judith. That belonged to Adrian. I know. She had no right to keep it. She said he left it for me. Take it off. Luke's expression closed. You do not get to tell me what I can have from my own father. He was my husband. And he was my father. We stood in the hallway arguing over a dead man who had divided us before either of us understood the division existed. I demanded to see the papers Luke had signed. He refused. I asked whether Judith had offered him money. His face changed. You think that is why I went? I think she knows the trust is frozen. I did not ask about the money. She did. She talked about medical history. She showed me photographs. She answered questions you would not. With whatever version keeps you useful to her. And your version keeps me useful to you. He walked upstairs. I followed. When he shut the guest room door, I opened it again. This is my house. The words sounded wrong as soon as I said them. Luke placed the watch on the dresser. Exactly. He left later that evening. He said he would stay with a coworker until he found an apartment. After his truck disappeared, I entered the room and searched the desk, the trash, and the jacket he had forgotten in the closet. I found no documents. Rachel found me kneeling beside the bed with an empty envelope in my hand. What are you doing? I need to know what he signed. So ask him. He will not tell me. That does not make this yours to search. You do not understand what Judith can do with his signature. And you do not understand that he is 26. I stood, I raised him. That is not permission to investigate him. I am trying to protect him. Rachel looked at the open drawers. Protection without consent can still become control. I closed the drawer harder than necessary. You think I should let Judith use him? I think you should stop treating love like it makes every choice yours. The next morning, Judith's attorneys filed a petition asking the court to dissolve the trust freeze. Attached was a statement claiming that Luke, an adult beneficiary, supported Judith's continued management and opposed my interference. The filing described me as a grieving adoptive parent who had concealed biological information while attempting to control assets belonging to the children. A local nonprofit newsletter repeated the language that afternoon. It did not name Rachel or Luke, but people who knew the foundation understood enough. 2 clients postponed meetings. One asked whether my estate work was being investigated. Judith had turned my silence into evidence against me. Rachel returned to the house that evening. She brought the ledger copies I had accidentally left inside a tax folder. She placed my grandmother's account statement on the table. You told us Dad arranged the adoptions. You did not tell us he used your inheritance. I was not ready to discuss the finances. Whose readiness matters here? I wanted you to understand that none of this changes how I feel about you. Then why keep removing the parts that make you look hurt or angry? Because this is not about making you choose me over Adrian. Rachel's voice softened, but you are making Luke choose you over Judith. I had no answer. For 3 days, Luke ignored my calls. I still set 3 places at dinner the first night. I noticed only after the food was ready. On the second night, I put down 2 plates, then added a third without thinking. By the third night, I left his chair empty. Miles came to the office after closing with a copy of the release Judith had filed. "Luke says he signed one page on a tablet," he said. "He did. This filing contains 7. He placed the pages in order. The first authorized access to medical and placement records. The second granted limited permission to communicate with the bank. The later pages were different. One declaration stated that I had withheld information to preserve emotional dependence. Another claimed I had pressured Luke regarding the trust and attempted to restrict his relationship with his biological relatives. The final page endorsed Judith's continued authority as trustee. Luke's electronic signature appeared beneath every statement. "He never saw these," I said. "I believe him." "Can we prove it?" Miles pointed to the audit footer. "The signature timestamp is identical on all 7 pages. Down to the second. Is that unusual?" "It means the system applied one signature across the packet." "But he agreed only to the release he saw." "That is what he says. We need the original digital audit trail to establish what was displayed before he signed." I looked at the declaration accusing me of financial coercion. Judith had not simply gained Luke's support, she had manufactured his testimony. Miles gathered the papers but left one copy in front of me. "There is another problem." "What?" "Luke's signature was added to pages he never saw, but until we prove that, the court will treat this as his sworn position." For the first time since the bank letter arrived, Judith had evidence carrying my son's name, and she had used it to make me look like the threat, My first instinct was to call Luke until he answered and explain every page. Miles stopped me. "Judith wants this to remain a family argument," he said. "Every angry message helps her. Every demand makes her filing sound more believable. So I say nothing. You stop trying to win your son and start proving what happened." That distinction hurt because it was correct. For weeks, I had treated Luke's trust as something I could recover through the right explanation. I had confused being understood with being obeyed. The next morning, Miles sent the 7-page packet to a digital document examiner. The visible footer showed one timestamp, but the embedded metadata told a longer story. The medical release Luke remembered signing had been created before his meeting with Judith. The declarations accusing me of coercion had been created afterward. Each page carried a different internal file number. The signature image had been exported once, then inserted into the later documents from a foundation administrator's account. It was not yet enough to prove who ordered it. It was enough to prove the packet had not existed in the form Judith submitted when Luke touched the tablet. I printed the metadata report and taped it to the wall of my office. Then I bought 2 rolls of butcher paper. Across one wall, I rebuilt 28 years, Rachel's birth. The first emergency exception. My inheritance withdrawal. The apartment payment. The hospital invoice. Rachel's placement. 4 years later, the sequence repeated with Luke. Beneath those dates, I added Adrian's trust, Judith's settlement offer, Luke's meeting, the signature export. The altered declarations, and the petition asking the court to remove the freeze. The wall stopped the facts from circling inside my head. It gave each betrayal a date, an account number, and a source. Rachel came after her shift and stood in front of it without speaking. "I owe you an apology," I said. She kept looking at the timeline. "For which part?" "For acting as if everything I sacrificed gave me more ownership over your life." She turned toward me. "I know you love us. That does not excuse what I did." "No, I searched Luke's room. I withheld records that belonged to both of you. I kept telling myself protection made it different." Rachel folded her arms. "What changes now? You and Luke decide what personal information becomes public. Medical history, photographs, adoption details, none of it goes into a complaint, court filing, or board submission without permission unless Miles says the law requires disclosure. And if keeping something private weakens your case, then it weakens my case." She studied my face as if checking for a hidden condition. "I will help with the timeline," she said. "I will not help you manage Luke." "I understand. You say that quickly. I am trying to learn before you have to say it twice." For the first time in days, she almost smiled. Rachel brought color-coded tabs from the hospital. Financial records were blue. Placement documents were yellow. Trust materials were green. Judith's communications were red. Rachel and Luke's private histories remained in sealed gray folders that stayed off the wall. Elena returned to Miles's office under a negotiated cooperation agreement. It did not erase her involvement. It required her to preserve records, testify truthfully, and disclose every payment she had received. In return, Miles would notify the appropriate authorities that she had cooperated before being compelled. She gave us 3 names, 3 other families. None involved Adrian. All had used Vale family pathways during its early years. In one case, a couple had been told a child's biological father was unknown. Years later, the father appeared in foundation donor records. In another, siblings had been separated and recorded as unrelated placements because placing them together would have exposed a conflict between Judith and a board member. The third family had paid emergency legal fees that were routed through a consulting company owned by the husband of Judith's former treasurer. I met each family separately. The first couple wanted Judith arrested before I finished explaining that I was not a prosecutor. The second mother wanted her adult daughters reunited immediately, even though neither daughter knew the other existed. The third family wanted their money returned and their names kept completely private. I made no promises. I can document what happened to me, I told them. Miles can preserve what you provide. But I cannot guarantee charges, money, public exposure, or reconciliation. One father looked disappointed. You are telling us you may lose? Yes. Then why are you doing this? Because Judith has spent years deciding which truths other families were allowed to know. I can challenge that without pretending I control the outcome. 2 families agreed to provide sworn statements. The third allowed Miles to use financial records without identifying the adopted child. The case expanded, but so did the cost. Court invoices accumulated beside client folders marked cancelled or postponed. People who had trusted me with payroll, taxes, and estates began speaking to me as if dishonesty were contagious. The local website published a story claiming I was attempting to redirect millions from adopted beneficiaries by attacking the woman who had helped create my family. The article quoted an unnamed foundation source who described me as emotionally unable to accept the children's biological identity. My phone filled with requests for comment. Rachel wanted to respond. Miles advised against it. I drafted 3 statements and deleted all of them. Judith believed public pressure would force me into an emotional defense. Instead, I let the story stand. Every hour she spent shaping the public version was an hour she believed the private evidence remained incomplete. At home, I opened the cabinet where Adrian kept our financial plans. He had designed our household budget before Rachel's adoption and updated it every January. The same spreadsheet structure followed us for almost 3 decades: mortgage, insurance, education, repairs, gifts. He had placed my inheritance under a category called family reserve. That reserve had paid to conceal his children's origins. I fed the old budgets through the shredder 1 page at a time. Then I opened a new account in my name alone. Miles helped separate my bookkeeping business and personal savings from estate structures Adrian had created. We did not hide assets. We documented and transferred what legally belonged to me so Judith could not use endless estate litigation to freeze every dollar I needed for my defense. For most of my marriage, Adrian had presented financial control as protection. I had accepted it because he always made the future sound dangerous without him. Now he was dead, and the structures he left behind still expected me to ask permission. I stopped. I did not call Luke. Instead, I wrote him a letter. There was no accusation against Judith. No request that he forgive me. No reminder of what I had done for him. I included the full timeline, copies of the payments, Elena's statement with legally protected information removed, and the metadata report. On the first page, I wrote, "You do not have to accept my conclusions. Verify every page independently. Your history belongs to you. I am sorry I behaved as if loving you made me the owner of it." I sent the packet by certified mail. A week passed, then Luke emailed Miles, not me. He asked for the name of an independent document examiner. It was not reconciliation. It was doubt. Judith began calling him more often after that. At first, she answered his questions patiently. She discussed Adrian's childhood, family medical conditions, and the years she spent watching from a distance. but when Luke asked whether Rachel could receive the same records, Judith changed the subject. When he asked why Rachel had not been contacted directly, Judith said Rachel seemed emotionally aligned with me and might not be ready. Luke told her readiness was not hers to decide, according to the message he later sent me. Judith's voice changed, the warmth disappeared. She reminded him that the foundation had protected his privacy for 26 years. She said public conflict could damage its ability to help thousands of children. Then she asked him to appear at the annual donor celebration. She had already prepared his remarks. The statement described Judith as a young mother forced into silence and praised the foundation for restoring Luke's stolen identity. It also referred to me as an adoptive parent whose grief had become fearful resistance to biological truth. Luke asked when the statement had been written. Judith said her communications team had drafted possibilities based on his experience. But you wrote what I believed before you met me, he said. She told him not to be dramatic. That was the first time Judith spoke to him as an obstacle instead of a son, while Luke's trust in her weakened. I studied Veil family pathways from the inside out. Non-profit filings gave us board names, committee structures, and conflict of interest policies. Old annual reports revealed transactions between the foundation, Judith, connected law firms, and consulting companies tied to board members. The bylaws contained the opening we needed. An emergency board inquiry could be triggered when certified evidence showed undisclosed related party transactions that created potential liability for the organization. The request had to go to independent board counsel, not Judith. It required supporting records from more than one transaction. We had them, my inheritance payment linked to Judith's housing and medical expenses. The third family's emergency fees linked to the former treasurer's husband. Adrian's trust placed Judith in authority over assets benefiting her biological children without full disclosure to the board. Miles prepared the ethics complaint. Rachel reviewed every section mentioning her and removed details she did not consent to release. Luke did not participate. I did not use his private medical records, photographs, or messages. We included only the filed declaration carrying his signature, the metadata showing later document creation, and his statement to Miles that he had not seen those pages. Elena signed a cooperation statement through her attorney. Two families submitted protected exhibits. Miles delivered the complaint to independent board counsel with a request to preserve all electronic records and convene an emergency session. He also notified the State Charity Oversight Office that evidence had been submitted involving possible related party transactions and altered records. We requested that an observer attend if the board convened. No one promised an investigation, no one promised charges, but Judith could no longer make the records disappear without creating another record of the disappearance. 3 days later, board counsel confirmed receipt. The emergency request was under review. That afternoon, another client canceled, then another. I placed their folders beside the growing stack of legal invoices and returned to the wall. For the first time, the cost of continuing was visible in the same room as the reason. Judith's donor celebration was scheduled for the following Friday. 2 days before it, Veil Family Pathways released a promotional announcement. Judith Veil would appear with her adult biological son in a public reunion celebrating truth, healing, and the Foundation's legacy. Luke's name was printed beneath hers. I called Miles. Did he agree to this? Not according to his attorney. His attorney? Luke retained separate counsel this morning. Before I could process that, an email entered my private account. It came from Luke. There was no greeting. The message contained a link to an encrypted folder and one sentence. These are the files as they appeared on Judith's office system before her lawyers changed them. I opened the folder. Inside were the unrevised release, the original signature audit trail, internal emails about attaching Luke's name to the declarations, and the first draft of his donor celebration speech. The speech had been written 11 days before Judith introduced herself to him. The speech had been written 11 days before Judith introduced herself to him, by sunrise on Friday. Miles had authenticated the files well enough to use them during the board inquiry. The complete forensic report would take longer, but the audit trail, internal emails, and server timestamps all matched the documents already preserved by independent board counsel. Judith still believed I was coming to negotiate. At 8:12 that morning, her attorney emailed a final settlement offer. If I signed before the donor celebration, Judith would withdraw the petition accusing me of coercion. guarantee Rachel and Luke access to the trust, and issue a private statement describing the adoption discrepancies as historical administrative errors, I would have to withdraw the ethics complaint. Elena's testimony would remain confidential. The other families would receive nothing. The email instructed me to enter through a side door at 9:30, before donors arrived. I forwarded it to Miles, then I dressed in the same gray suit I wore when I met new clients. Not the black dress Judith had seen at Adrian's funeral. Not anything that made me look like a widow arriving to defend a dead marriage. When I reached Vale Family Pathways, workers were hanging a white and gold banner across the main hall. Judith Vale and her son, a family restored. Luke's photograph appeared beside hers. Through the glass wall of the second-floor conference room, I could see staff arranging programs on rows of chairs below. Donors were already entering the lobby. A string quartet tested microphones near the stage. Judith's celebration was beginning outside. Inside the boardroom, her authority was ending one document at a time. Independent counsel had convened the emergency session under the conflict of interest provision Miles found. 9 board members sat around Adrian's old walnut table. 2 representatives from the State Charity Oversight Office occupied seats near the wall. They were observers, not prosecutors, and counsel reminded everyone of that before the record began. Elena sat beside her attorney. 2 affected families joined through secured video connections. Their names were restricted from the public minutes. Rachel sat behind Miles. Luke was not there. Judith entered 6 minutes late with 2 attorneys and the expression of a woman arriving to correct a misunderstanding. She looked at me first. You were instructed to meet privately. I received your offer. You should have accepted it. Independent counsel called the meeting to order. For the next 20 minutes, Judith's attorneys challenged the inquiry itself. They argued that the board lacked complete information, that sealed adoption materials could not be discussed, and that disgruntled families were misinterpreting practices that had once been legal and common. Then Judith spoke. She did not deny that records had been amended. She called the changes protective. She did not deny that emergency exceptions had been reused. She called them necessary. She described the Foundation's early years as a time when children could be abandoned because adults feared scandal, poverty, religious judgment, or political damage. We made imperfect decisions inside imperfect systems, she said. But every decision was made to place a vulnerable child in a safe home. Her gaze settled on me. Mrs. Ellison received 2 children she has loved for decades. Those placements created a family. It is deeply troubling that she now presents the circumstances of that family's creation as evidence of harm. She wanted me to reject the children in order to condemn what she had done. That was the story she had prepared for me, a humiliated adoptive mother furious that biology had made her less important. Independent counsel asked whether I wished to respond. Yes. I looked at Rachel before I began. She gave one small nod. The placements did create my family, I said. Rachel and Luke are the greatest part of my life. Nothing presented today changes that. Judith's shoulders relaxed slightly, then I continued. But loving the result does not legalize the method. A child can be loved in the home where she is placed and still have been placed through fraud. A mother can be grateful for her children and still object to being deceived, financially exploited, and denied the truth. One board member asked whether I wanted the adoptions invalidated. No. Do you dispute Rachel and Luke's rights to the trust? No. The trust belongs to whoever the court determines it belongs to. I am not asking this board to award me their money. Judith leaned toward her attorney. The bitterness she had assigned to me was no longer available. Miles began with the financial exhibits. He traced my grandmother's inheritance into the account Adrian called our family reserve. From there, certified checks went to Vale Family Pathways, the apartment used by Judith after Rachel's birth, legal counsel involved in the emergency placement, and a hospital invoice issued in Judith's name. 4 years later, another sequence funded Luke's placement. The board's treasurer interrupted. Were these amounts listed as restricted donations? No, Miles said. Mrs. Ellison was told they were adoption expenses. Internal Foundation records classified part of the money as donor-supported maternal assistance while concealing the beneficiary's relationship to the Foundation's founder. He moved to Adrian's trust. Judith had authority over assets benefiting her biological children. yet annual conflict disclosures described her relationship to the beneficiaries as institutional rather than familial. A board member turned toward her. "Did you ever disclose that the beneficiaries were your children?" Judith answered carefully, "The trust was created through private counsel. I relied on their guidance. That was not my question." Her attorney objected to the tone. Independent counsel allowed the question. Judith said she did not recall how the relationship had been characterized in every annual disclosure. One of the board members reached for a framed photograph that had been placed on the table for the donor event. It showed Judith surrounded by adoptive families. He turned it face down. Miles introduced the digital evidence next. The first release Luke saw had been created before his meeting. The declarations accusing me of manipulation were created afterward. Internal emails instructed a foundation administrator to apply the approved beneficiary signature across the final packet. The email chain included a message from Judith's chief of staff. "JV wants the son support attached before council files Monday." Judith's lawyer said the initials could refer to someone else. Miles displayed the account record showing the message originated from Judith's executive office. Then he opened Luke's donor speech. The creation date appeared on the screen, 11 days before Judith met him. The room stayed quiet long enough for the music downstairs to become audible through the glass. Judith finally said, "Communications teams prepare scenarios. That is not misconduct. Preparing a speech is not the central issue," Miles replied. "Preparing a man's beliefs before contacting him supports a broader pattern of manufacturing consent." The board asked whether Luke would testify. His attorney entered alone. "For 1 second, I thought Luke had changed his mind." Then the door opened again. Luke walked in wearing a dark jacket. Adrian's silver watch was in his hand, not on his wrist. He did not sit beside me. He took the empty chair near independent counsel and placed the watch on the table. Judith's face softened immediately. "Luke, you do not have to participate in this spectacle." "I know." Her attorney asked whether he had voluntarily signed a release. "Yes." "One page allowing access to records." "Did Mrs. Ellison pressure you regarding your relationship with Ms. Vale?" Luke looked at me. She tried to control it. Rachel lowered her eyes. "I forced myself not to defend myself," Luke continued. "She told me not to contact Judith. She searched the room where I was staying. She kept information from me because she believed she knew when I was ready." Judith's attorney glanced toward the board as if the case had been restored. Then Luke said, "None of that gave this foundation permission to attach my signature to statements I never saw." The attorney asked whether Luke supported Judith's role as trustee. "I have not taken a position on who should control the trust." "Yet you wanted access to your biological history." "Yes. And Ms. Vale provided it. She provided parts of it when those parts made her look like a victim." Judith's expression hardened. "I gave you the truth your adoptive mother withheld." Luke's hand closed around the edge of the table. "You gave me a speech you wrote before you knew what I thought. I knew what you had been denied. You knew what you needed me to say." Judith appealed to the board. "This is what Mara has done. She has turned him against the only person willing to acknowledge who he is." Luke shook his head. "I am not here because Mara convinced me she was right. She was wrong about a lot of things." He looked at me again. "We are not fixed." I nodded. "But her failures do not make your documents real," he said to Judith. "And they do not make your fraud protection." Rachel chose to speak next. She did not discuss her medical history, private placement details, or relationship with Adrian. She had prepared 6 sentences. "You keep describing us as children who needed protection," she said. "We are adults now, and you are still deciding what we may know. When we may know it, and how we should feel afterward. You did not protect our identities. You managed them. You treated 2 people as evidence that your reputation deserved to survive." Judith looked at me. "Tell them," she said. "Tell them I gave them to you out of love." Every face turned toward me. I could have called Judith selfish. I could have said Adrian chose me because I was the better mother. I could have claimed the moral victory she wanted me to fight for. Instead, I said, "I cannot tell Rachel and Luke what your motives were. Their history is not mine to interpret for them. Judith stared at me as if I had refused a role we had both rehearsed for years. Her attorney opened a final folder. He said a recently located document proved Adrian intended me to understand the placements and that Judith had relied on his assurance that I would eventually be told. The first page carried Adrian's signature. My name appeared in the opening paragraph. For a moment, I could not hear anything else. I thought of every check I signed, every rushed instruction I followed. Every time Adrian told me not to ask questions because a child was waiting. What is it? I asked. A written disclosure prepared by Mr. Ellison after Luke's placement, the attorney said. It indicates he intended to explain the biological relationships to his wife. Judith leaned back. He told me Mara knew enough to understand. Miles requested the complete document and chain of custody. The letter was drafted in Adrian's handwriting, then typed by a law office. It described his relationship with Judith, both births, and the private placement structure. At the bottom, beneath the typed signature line, someone had written, "Not delivered." Client declined after final review. Adrian had prepared a confession, then he chose silence. The document did not prove I knew, it proved he had considered telling me and decided not to. Judith's attorney argued that Adrian controlled the arrangements and that Judith had followed his instructions out of fear. Elena spoke before Miles could respond. That may explain the first placement, she said. It does not explain what happened afterward. Her attorney placed a set of authenticated memoranda before the board. After Rachel's adoption, Judith personally instructed Elena to preserve the emergency classification for future related placements. After Luke's birth, Judith authorized substitute identifiers and approved the consulting payment Elena received. The final memorandum was written 9 years after Luke's placement, long after any immediate crisis had ended. It directed staff to deny biological connections if either child requested records. Adrian had helped design the lie. Judith had maintained it after there was no emergency left to protect. Her attorney stopped blaming the dead man. Independent counsel asked whether the evidence had been provided anywhere outside the room. Judith turned toward me sharply. I answered. The Foundation's liability insurer received the certified financial exhibits and preservation notice yesterday. The State Charity Oversight Office received the same evidence. Board counsel already holds the original digital files. You had no authority to contact our insurer, Judith said. I did not contact them as your employee. I contacted them as a claimant whose records were altered by an insured organization. One of the state observers clarified that no charging decision had been made. The office would review preserved materials and determine whether civil referral, administrative action, or further investigation was appropriate. The board could not promise Judith would be prosecuted. It could decide whether she remained in control while the records were examined. The vote was not immediate. For nearly an hour, board members questioned counsel, reviewed bylaws, and debated whether suspension would damage the celebration happening downstairs. Through the glass, I saw donors taking seats beneath Judith's banner. A staff member tested the microphone. Judith's empty chair waited at center stage. The board voted 7-2 to suspend her as executive director and trustee representative pending independent review. They appointed interim management, ordered preservation of all electronic and paper records, prohibited destruction or alteration of placement files, and authorized outside counsel to cooperate with regulators and the insurer. The vote did not resolve the trust. It did not restore my inheritance. It did not determine civil or criminal liability. But Judith no longer controlled the files, the employees, or the investigation. Outside, the donor program began 12 minutes late. No one announced why Judith had not appeared. Whispers moved through the lobby as board counsel escorted her toward a private exit. Staff members removed her prepared remarks from the podium. Someone began taking down the reunion banner. Judith stopped beside me before entering the elevator. Her attorneys moved ahead, leaving us one moment without witnesses close enough to hear. You think this brings him back to you? She asked. I looked toward Luke. He stood across the hall with his attorney. Rachel was beside him, but he was not looking at me. You won the board, Judith said. You may even win the case. Luke still will not come home. The elevator doors opened. She stepped inside. For months, I had built timelines, preserved records, anticipated filings, and forced every hidden transaction into a room where Judith could no longer control the meaning. But Luke was not an account to reconcile. he was not a witness to persuade or a relationship I could restore by proving I had been less wrong than someone else. As the elevator doors closed on Judith, I understood that the final part of my victory could not be engineered. The final part of my victory could not be engineered. For months, there was no single moment when the truth won. There were subpoenas, filings, invoices, and long stretches when nothing moved. Judith remained suspended while outside counsel reviewed the foundation's records. 2 months later, she resigned permanently. Her statement blamed grief-driven litigation and modern standards unfairly applied to historic decisions. The state investigation stayed open, examining altered placements, diverted funds, undisclosed transactions, and signatures placed on documents beneficiaries never approved. No one promised Judith would be imprisoned. The probate case ended through settlement. Adrian's legitimate trust was divided equally between Rachel and Luke under independent administration. Neither Judith nor I would control it. Improper foundation money went into an outside restitution fund for other families. I recovered part of my inheritance, not all of it. Some transfers were too old. Some records were incomplete. What I recovered looked substantial until legal fees, forensic costs, and lost clients were deducted. Revenge stories rarely mention retainers. Mine could have been measured in cancelled checks. Elena testified before regulators and in 2 civil proceedings. Her cooperation mattered. But it did not erase the money she accepted or the safeguards she bypassed. She surrendered part of her pension and left placement work forever. Afterward, she called me. I told the truth too late. Yes. I thought helping afterward would make the first choices less ugly. Did it? No, that was our last conversation. My bookkeeping business survived, but smaller. Some clients returned. Others never did. I moved into 2 rooms above an insurance agency. Rachel helped carry files upstairs and labeled every cabinet. You hate my labels, I said. I hate your labels. These are better. Our relationship did not return to what it had been. It became more adult. Rachel still called and brought groceries when I worked late. But when I reminded her twice about a doctor's appointment, she said, 1 reminder is love. 3 is surveillance. I apologized instead of explaining. She opened her amended birth certificate and biological records alone. Later, she showed me the certificate. Judith's name appeared where mine never could. Rachel placed it in a fireproof folder beside the first letter I wrote on the day her adoption became final. In that letter, I promised not to be perfect, only to keep choosing her. Rachel never told me which document mattered more. She kept both. Luke remained distant. He rented an apartment near his warehouse and communicated mostly through legal messages. He met Judith 4 times under attorney-arranged conditions. No staff, cameras, or recordings. At first, I asked Rachel what happened. Did Luke believe her? Ask Luke. He won't answer me. Then you don't get the answer yet. The words hurt. I stopped asking. Months later, Luke told me enough. Judith could discuss Adrian for hours. She remembered his favorite music, the scar on his hand, and the way he folded receipts. But whenever Luke asked why she ordered staff to deny their biological connection years after both placements, Judith returned to the same explanation. She had protected everyone. When he asked whom everyone included, she named donors, staff, adoptive families, the foundation, and herself. She did not name him until he pointed it out. Biology gave Luke answers. It did not give him safety. He kept Adrian's letters and medical history. He stopped wearing Adrian's watch. I began therapy. During my first appointment, I spent 20 minutes describing Judith's fraud and Adrian's deception. The therapist asked, "What did control do for you before it became a problem?" I almost left. Instead, I told her about my mother. She disappeared from my childhood in stages, missed visits, disconnected numbers, promises that arrived too late. I learned that being useful made people stay longer. I cooked, organized, remembered, fixed, and anticipated. Adrian loved being anticipated. Rachel tolerated it until she became an adult. Luke experienced it as a debt. I had used usefulness to protect myself from abandonment, then called it motherhood. Knowing why did not excuse it, but it gave me somewhere to begin. The house was next. It was too large and too full of Adrian's decisions. On closing day, I unscrewed the brass Ellison nameplate. Adrian had installed it after Rachel's adoption and said it proved we were permanent. The screws were rusted. Rachel held the ladder. Removing it doesn't mean you won, she said. I know. I took it down because the next family deserved their own name on the door. My new apartment had one bedroom, a narrow kitchen, and a river balcony. I bought furniture without asking what Adrian would have chosen. I left one wall empty without fearing an unfinished life. A national television producer offered enough money to cover most of my legal debt. She wanted an exclusive interview about the mother who exposed an adoption empire. She requested Rachel's amended birth certificate, Luke's hospital photograph, and Elena's recorded confession. She also wanted me to discuss which woman deserved to be called the real mother. I declined. She increased the offer. I declined again. Then I submitted my records directly to the restitution administrator, where affected families could use them without turning my children into entertainment. Judith had spent decades controlling the narrative. I did not defeat her by replacing it with mine. 9 months after the board meeting, Luke called. I have your keychain, he said, the red wrench. Dad kept it in his desk. I remembered buying it when Luke was 8 after he repaired a cabinet hinge with a butter knife. Luke asked whether he could visit. He arrived carrying diner sandwiches. Adrian's watch was wrapped in a dish towel inside the bag. The red wrench keychain hung from his belt loop. I don't want the watch, he said. You can keep it. I know. I don't want it. I placed it in a kitchen drawer. We sat at the table. He did not apologize for leaving. I did not ask him to. After a long silence, he said. Would you have adopted me if you knew? I had rehearsed answers in therapy. Every polished version sounded controlling. I don't know what my younger self would have done, I said. Luke stared at me. I wanted children desperately. I loved Adrian and trusted him. If I had known about the affair and the deception before your placement, I might have been too angry or frightened to enter it. His eyes lowered, but I know what I choose now. He looked up. You. I choose a relationship with you that you are free to refuse. I choose to tell you the truth even when it makes me look bad. I choose to be your mother without using that word as a claim against you. Luke rubbed the red wrench between his fingers. I'm not moving back. I know. I'm not ready to say everything is okay. I know. And I may keep meeting Judith. That is your decision. He watched me, waiting for the warning that usually followed. I gave him none. Rachel arrived 30 minutes later. She had agreed to dinner before I knew Luke was coming. No one hugged. We ate sandwiches and talked about work, training, and my upstairs neighbor who vacuumed at midnight. When the food was gone, I opened the cabinet and took down 2 plates for the pie Rachel brought. For months, I had practiced setting only the places I knew would be filled. Luke reached past me, took a 3rd plate from the shelf, and placed it on the table himself. He stayed through dessert. He did not promise to return the next week. He did not forgive me in one speech. When he left, he took the red keychain and left Adrian's watch in my drawer. Rachel helped wash the plates. Are you going to call him tomorrow? No, good. Then she added, maybe wait until afternoon. We both laughed. Judith and Adrian designed the circumstances that brought Rachel and Luke into my life. They arranged the paperwork, controlled the money, managed the truth, and decided what each of us was allowed to know. I believed defeating them meant proving which woman deserved to be called mother. I was wrong. Rachel chose the boundaries of our relationship. Luke chose the pace of his return. I chose to remain available without turning availability into pressure. The family they manufactured through secrecy did not survive unchanged. Something more honest began in its place. Judith and Adrian controlled how my children entered my life. They no longer control what we become next.